nonsense.
Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
I'm Chad McCanna.
And this week, it's a special episode. Yay!
We have such an artificial way of introducing every show.
Okay, well, a little bit of backstory. You might remember we ran a promotion gimmick. What do you call it? Begging for money, panhandling.
Snake oil salesmanship,
prostituting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we did this last year when the site server was up for renewal. Right. So we didn't want to pay for it because we have crippling.
It's expensive.
And we have crippling drug addictions, as well as gambling. Can't forget gambling. So we asked
addictions in general.
Yeah. So we asked the people, you and your friends and your family and your mother, for money. And we called it the Silverbacker program.
Initiative.
Silverbacker initiative, right. So this was kind of a faux Kickstarter kind of thing where we...
It was Kickstarter without all the trappings of the IRS.
So the top tier was if you donate so much, you get to actually take over, hijack an episode of the Kongversation. And...
a jungle hijacks.
That's right. And anyway, so few people took us up on that, and we got them on the air, except one. And funny story, we recorded this episode with this individual last year, near the end of the year.
Yeah.
And the episode, it was a really good episode. You never heard it, and that's because at the very end of the episode, Chad's computer died.
Yeah, I had my computer of like the last 5 years. Upon hitting stop on the recording, the hard drive just died.
So I had my audio file, and this individual had his. We didn't have Chad, so it would have been amusing to edit it together anyway and just see what happens. But ultimately, we kind of needed Chad's audio, and it couldn't be retrieved, so we had to postpone re-recording the episode for a later date.
Although it would have been fun to hear you both just sound like insane people, talking and waiting for 30 seconds at a time for some imaginary person to make their point.
That's actually how most of these episodes are unedited. It's a real disaster. Anyway, without further ado, we brought him back, and now it's take two. Second time's a charm. It's not a saying, but I just claimed it was. Please welcome our Silverbacker, Zeppelin.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, you're Zeppelin from off of the Donkey Kong forums, aren't you?
I think so.
DK Vine forums.
I believe
Donkey Kong forums.
The only Donkey Kong forum there is.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
No disrespect meant to DKC Atlas.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
All due disrespect to Operation Rarefall.
Was Dude Disrespect Dude Illegence's rival, like on the East Coast?
Dude is respect. It starts with an I.
He was West Side, due diligence.
Oh, that's the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They both their respective posses wound up assassinating each other.
Yeah,
right.
It's a sad tragedy, but a lot of good records made in the process.
And to this day, their holograms are still at war with one another.
The Illigence is respect battle has decimated the middle of the country. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this episode again. We regret terribly what happened last time.
By the way, should we call you Zeppelin or by your real name?
You can call me by my real name if you remember my real name.
Angry Sex Tractor.
Damn, you guessed it.
Yeah, you have really cruel parents.
Yeah, well, it's we grew up on a farm. There wasn't a whole lot to do.
That would explain why you're so good at tilling.
Yeah, actually, it is. Tilling. With my dick in the fields. Anyways.
Yeah.
But no, my real name is Andy. Andy Barrett. You can use that name to track me down and assassinate me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mr. Barrett, if you're nasty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's probably a reference to something.
Yeah, it probably is. I know it through. I know the general quote through pop culture osmosis.
Sometimes Chad just says
it.
silly things and claims it's from something else.
Oh, yeah, we established that last episode that a lot of
2 episodes ago.
2 episodes
Yeah.
ago that a lot of what I say is just jabber. Well, Hyle too. It's just nonsense.
Right? No, I gibber, you jabber.
That's right. Yeah, together we are B.A. Baracus.
We're both 2 lowercase t's. When put together, we make a Mr. T.
Not to be confused with the delicious Bloody Mary mix. That was a reference that you'll know if you fly on airplanes and drink alcohol on them.
And don't we all?
Yeah. Airplane booze. So, you requested a specific subject for your Silverbacker episode, namely the aesthetics of the Donkey Kong Country series. So, I'm curious why.
Yeah, why?
Oh,
Why?
Yeah.
Why would you pick that, Andy?
What are you doing?
What could have
I'm a
what could
pretentious
have possibly
asshole.
convinced you to pick that topic? Explain
Well, like I said,
yourselves.
I'm a pretentious asshole. I consider myself an artist. I grew up in the fields, fucking the fields, and I thought I wanted to make something better for myself. And here we are.
Here we are talking about the aesthetics of cartoon monkeys.
Yes, I graduated from dirt into animals.
Yeah, it's so easy to draw that straight line between those 2 points.
Well, they're both on a farm, and eventually I got tired of the farm animals, and I started going to the zoo. And to fill my time not at the zoo, I picked up Donkey Kong Country.
Funnily enough, yeah,
It's really good if something ever happens to the ape raper who sings our theme song, and it's nice to know we have a spare.
Well, hey,
Yeah,
I don't rape apes. This is a consensual thing. I'm a God-fearing man.
My apologies. I didn't mean to lump you in with said individual. I just said at least your sexual activities are similar, which is what we're looking for.
And also, it should be noted that stepping away from farm-based sexual escapades to visit a zoo is exactly how Donkey Kong Country itself was developed.
Yes, this is actually quite accurate.
Yeah. So
You had
Andy,
Chris Sutherland, and now you have me.
Andy, okay, so before you enchant us with your tales of aesthetics, the audience who listens to this show, they know Chad and I, they know us. We've laid our souls bare for them. They don't know you though. So, real quick, would you explain how you came to the DK Vine forum, DK Vine in general, the fandom? Basically, tell us your life story, but no longer than 5 minutes.
Right.
Oh yeah, we will time box you.
I guess. Let me think. I probably should have put more thought into this. Okay.
It's 20 seconds gone.
God damn it!
Tick tick tick.
My first actual game was Donkey Kong Country. Up until the. What? Yeah. Well,
What?
I was born in 1990, so I was 4 years old
Oh man,
when it came out.
Oh yeah, that'd do it.
Yeah, and I had played other games up until that point. We had rented video games from the grocery store. Basically, we live kind of outside. My family did. We live outside of civilization, so we did not have a Blockbuster. So
That's the true mark of society.
yeah,
Or at least it was until
yeah.
about now it's if you have the rusted out remnants of a Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Right.
Then you know your community has made it.
But yeah, we rented it from the local grocery store. This was around 1993. I was probably about 3 years old. And my parents started renting me video games to preoccupy me, I guess. And I did that for a while. I really loved it. I remember playing a bunch of games that were really bad. Like, we talked about this last time we recorded the episode, and I never looked into it. But it's like Mario's Time Machine or something like that.
Oh yeah, the educational Mario titles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that like Mario is Missing? Was that one of them?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I have no idea how the game even functions. I just remember you were Mario in a room with the time machine, and you don't do anything but like read text about the past.
Oh yeah, it was a piece of shit. Because I rented that game from Blockbuster because I had a Blockbuster, and yeah, I was really excited. Mario's Time Machine. I mean, how could you go wrong?
It sounds really badass.
Yeah, and oh my god, I don't think I ever got past that first room. It was just a piece of putrid shit.
Yeah, and it's not so much that the game was bad, it's just the reading is hard.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't want to learn. I'm a child. I've learned enough.
Well, that's a lot of words. I want to hit buttons.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even back then, I remember thinking, wait, how is Mario time traveling to Earth? He's in the Mushroom Kingdom, which is a separate dimension. I was already a little piece of shit back then, so...
So did you ever... so at what point were good games injected into your youthful household?
Well, really not until Donkey Kong Country.
Okay. So you were playing games at the tender age of pre-4?
Yeah, this was, preschool age. I was,
Wow.
3, maybe 4. And it would... Part of figuring out what date this would be, figuring out when they made the bundle for Donkey Kong Country, because that's what I ended up getting. I'm wanting to say that it was on my 4th birthday, which was, would be September 2nd, 94. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had the option. I could either get Donkey Kong Country, or this was at like a shitty small town Walmart that had like 5 Nintendo games. I could either get Donkey Kong Country or Street Fighter 2. And I was a very pacifist little kid, and I didn't like the idea of fighting, especially not street fighting. You don't know what's going to happen there. You might have to go to the hospital.
Right.
But I didn't really...
Children are nothing if not cautious.
Right. I mean, the same reason I actually hated Power Rangers as a kid. Like, that looked very dangerous to me.
Well, yeah, they fight with those helmets on. How did they see anything?
Yeah. Actually, funny story. My dad had like a muscle car, and he would try to give me rides in it, and I would freak the fuck out. And, like, my seatbelt wouldn't be completely tightened. Like, I'd be, like, tightening it down. Dad, you're going too fast! You're going too fast! And he'd be going, like, 15 miles per hour and just, revving it slightly. And,
so what you're saying is you like Donkey Kong Country because it's boring.
Yeah, it's very vanilla.
It has a notoriously plodding pace that does not reward speed in any way.
Yeah, I found it not very fresh and exciting, and too
many characters.
The best character was the banana, for sure. Anyways. So my choices were Street Fighter, Donkey Kong Country. I didn't want Street Fighter, but I didn't want Donkey Kong Country either because in my 4-year-old mind, I somehow pictured that game. I guess I wasn't looking at the box art, or if I was ignoring it like a little brat. But I literally pictured a game, a 3D game, where you played a yellow donkey in a yellow desert wandering around aimlessly. And I thought that sounded incredibly boring, and I remember
honestly, I would play the hell out of that game.
Yeah.
It does sound very mellow.
It sounds like the first level of Heroes of Kazam.
Actually, I think it's called Journey on the PS3.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's when I first saw that game, I flashed back to that moment because it just imagine that, but a donkey and no objectives and no actual terrain.
And then you find out that NPC donkey you encounter in the middle of the desert is actually another person playing as a donkey.
Yeah, they had pretty advanced technology back then. Untapped. But no, so I begrudgingly accepted Donkey Kong Country, even though I was like kind of throwing a silent hissy fit about it. But we brought it, we brought it home, and I was just immediately absolutely blown away because all the games I had played up to this point had Mario's Time Machine, Tom and Jerry, the Super Nintendo game.
I think that was the full title.
Right, yeah. But these were the experiences I had with games.
I hope it had that racist mammy in it.
Super mammy.
Yeah. She would later go on to co-star in Grabbed by the Ghoulies.
Right, she turned her career around, but...
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I was immediately floored. Just the graphics alone completely blew my mind. And I remember playing the first level and getting to the end of the level where it said exit and legitimately thinking that the game must be over because I had my mind so blown that this must be it. And then, they did the little da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it's like, whoa, what's this? There's more. And on to Ropey Rampage. And I thought, well, this surely must be it. And
you're like Cranky Kong, where he just says, surely this game can't hold up much longer.
Yeah.
The weight of the graphics.
Right. The title screen alone should have caused the system to break out in flames.
But no, and then it kept going, and then by the end of the first world, I thought that must be it, and it kept going, and it got to a point where once I got past maybe Vine Valley, I thought maybe this was just an infinite game that
dynamically generated.
Yeah.
Oh God, Chris Sutherland would have been able to retire had he pulled that off on the Super Nintendo.
You were a child of extremes, weren't you?
Well, yeah.
Either this game is one level or it goes on forever. There's no middle ground.
Yeah. And so I think I probably beat that game in about a year, because I remember when. Okay, well, here's how I was actually introduced to Donkey Kong Country 2. Should I talk about that, or should I talk more about Donkey Kong Country aesthetics now?
Well, so in playing Donkey Kong Country for the first time, when did the visual elements in the game really start to become so important to you as part of the overall experience?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, immediately, because I was immediately sucked into this world that this has been talked about so much, but immediately, even as a kid, it didn't really feel like I was playing a video game. It felt like I was actually having an experience in a world that could exist, somehow parallel to ours, or in ours even.
Yeah.
And it was probably... Yeah.
It's out there somewhere, guys. I know it is.
We're going to find it one. That'll be the ultimate that'll be the end game of DK Vine, is mounting an expedition a la the Vine Donkey Kong audio program.
Series finale of the Kongversation, the last week of DK Vine before the heat death of the universe. We find Donkey Kong Island. Yes.
The purpose of the universe will be fulfilled.
Right.
But no, it's I don't know. It's kind of a hard question because I can't pin down a specific point where I started thinking that. But
well, just taking the game, archetype to archetype, obviously, I doubt you have much firsthand experience in a jungle or perhaps like deep in a cave. But I mean, you might. I don't know. If you said you grew up in a fairly rural area, was it mountainous?
Was it tropical rainforest?
Alistair?
No, it was actually. I grew up in Missouri, which is, pretty much deciduous. Well, I grew up in the Ozark Mountains, really. Deciduous woods, mixed plains with, not like mountains, but really tall hills, and we call them mountains because we're hillbillies. And, and a lot of my early memories are of being outside in the wilderness. Well, not like wilderness, like outside the house in the woods, supervised. Memories of that, I think that's part of why Donkey Kong Country appealed to me so immediately, was because it's just like, this is like my life. This is me playing inside. And that appealed to me so much. And like accepting that made me feel like I'm not just playing a video game. I'm really in this world playing as maybe, Donkey Kong being my avatar or whatever.
I sort of, the sense that I had at a young age playing the game, it was, to me, what it felt like is that I was directing a Pixar movie. It was like, it felt like everything that I was seeing on my screen was way too good to be a video game.
Right.
And it was, especially on a CRT. I mean, now you can see all the pixels, but back then it was entirely smooth looking. Mm-hmm. And that's what I got out of it, more so than feeling like it was a real world. And that might be because I lived in the suburbs, whereas you and Hyle, grew up experiencing nature as young people.
Yeah, I grew up with my back to a national park, and so I had mountains, I had forest. And so, from an early age, I had exposure to that. And, to this day, I mean, ask Chad, I'll be out hiking at least once a week. And that's my exercise. That's my hobby outside of video games.
He calls it walking the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, with my mistress.
Right.
No, I actually do hike, and sometimes I am on the Appalachian Trail, but I don't walk the whole thing.
Nor is the Appalachian Trail in South America.
Exactly. Yes, believe it or not, it's actually in Appalachia. But yeah, I've always had an affinity for nature. It's only grown stronger over the years, and I think I really don't know. It's kind of a chicken or egg situation, because did my appreciation of nature grow stronger because of Donkey Kong, or is my love of Donkey Kong because of my love of nature?
Yeah,
I really don't know
feel
at this
the same
point.
way. Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. And it's really amazing how good of a job Rare really did of creating that vibe too, because other games, they'll have forest stages, or especially at the time. Now there's really awesome games that really do great things with aesthetics, but especially at the time, there would be games with forest levels, desert levels, so on, and
there's always a desert level. There's always a desert world with like Egyptian pyramids, and it's.
But even in games like Beyond Mario that really tried to be more naturalistic, they never really quite felt that way. They still felt like video games for whatever reason. And I really have to commend Rare. I think one of the greatest things they did with the Donkey Kong Country series was actually make a game that was more than a game, in the sense that every element of it tried to play into actually creating an experience. The music is extremely atmospheric. Huge props to David Wise for realizing that that's exactly what that game needed. And
Evelyn Fisher also did some of the more ambient sounds on that soundtrack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Ice Cave Chant was hers.
Robin Beelan did the funky theme.
Right. Which is very, very ambient and reminiscent of nature.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Voices of the Temple was another one of Evelyn's. But yeah, it's and then you look at Donkey Kong Country 3, and she really hammered that home in that game. Sort of distinct from David Wise, who was more melodic. But I think, to your point, something that was in the music that really hadn't been. I'm not going to go into the Ken Lobb DKC exposed thing. But
why would you?
What you hear on the radio?
And why would you get into that? It's not like we're getting paid.
That's true, man. This we do this podcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and guess what? How? Guess what?
What?
It's pro bono. So, but no, the instrumentation that he used in that game, and I had never really heard those SNES instruments in another title before, so he had to have created them specifically for this game.
I'm actually almost certain that he did. There's an interview somewhere floating around that's a really fantastic interview with Wise, talking about how he developed the music for the country games, and from what I remember, he roughly based it on a certain type of synthesizer that he really liked, but I believe that he pretty much invented all those sounds from scratch because he wasn't satisfied with the palette that was there.
Yeah, because the palette that was there, I'm guessing, was more or less what you get in Mario Paint.
Yeah, I mean, and if you listen to SNES games, like, they all sound similar to that, because, like, at some point you're going to hear instruments that are pretty similar to instruments in other games.
That weird dog barking,
yeah.
It's kind of Yoshi, but it's
And that actually formed the basis for the entire new Super Mario Brothers series.
Yeah, I feel
yeah,
pretty much. I mean, in a lot of ways, Donkey Kong Country is what brought video game music beyond beat boops.
Mm-hmm. Well, at least, I mean, I know, like, was it really the first game that really had, like, because I know the PlayStation was new around that time. I don't know.
PlayStation wasn't out in '94.
Was it not? I was thinking it was '94. Or was it '95?
I think it was '94.
I remember the campaign around Donkey Kong Country, and they did not seem to give a shit about the existence of.
They probably didn't want to acknowledge the PlayStation.
That's true. It was around that time. It was close. It was probably close enough that Nintendo was aware of it.
Yeah.
But
because they're responsible for the creation of the PlayStation,
right? Inadvertently, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. PlayStation came out December 3rd, 1994 in Japan.
Oh, okay.
So it had not yet released at the time.
Yeah.
Barely.
Right. And
But I think it's safe to say that DKC was one of the first just masterpieces when it came to the soundtrack. I mean,
yeah, I'm no game historian, but I think I say beat boops. What I mean is, like, up until that point, I can't think of an example of a video game that wasn't just a kind of just a melody that would go along in the background that would be vaguely related to what you were doing. Donkey Kong Country is the first game I can think of that actually tried to tie into the rest of the atmosphere of the game on a level, beyond just being a melody that sounded nice.
And yeah, it really was the perfect blend of music and graphics, and and I think the memorable character design too, because that's something else that Rare really did was, they get some shit for this, but they didn't really get too abstract with the character design. They took real animals, they kind of just added googly eyes to them. But
and that's something that's often leveled at these games, is that they're trying to be photorealistic, or but actual photorealism, or at least an attempt at it, is what you get in something like Mortal Kombat.
Right. Like, I think it's unfair, but I mean, I don't know. People want, like, I don't know, overly cute characters or badass characters. But because the Donkey Kong characters as designed by Rare were kind of just more naturalistic, while cartoony, they, for some reason, they don't resonate with some people, while they resonated very much with me, to the point where, I mean, look at me, I'm so fanatical about them that I'm on season 3 of the fucking Kongversation. What is this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. It's a really fantastic middle ground between cartoony and realistic, because it's not so realistic that it feels too realistic, but it's not so cartoony that it loses the feel of nature. And
it's like it sidesteps the uncanny valley.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, even the uncanny valley for trees, but like it doesn't. It's not what a palm tree looks like. It's what a Donkey Kong Country palm tree looks like.
Right.
And that's.
But I completely buy the world. Like, I completely can suspend my disbelief that this world exists. Like, look at the bramble stages in Donkey Kong Country 2. Have you ever seen brambles like that? But because the music, the atmosphere, I can completely buy that this exists.
And that's a great specifically that the music in that stage, because Andy, you were talking about how in the first game the music really supported the archetype and what was going on.
Yeah.
But then in Donkey Kong Country 2, like less than a year later, David Wise decided, I'm going to go postmodern.
It's almost like the archetype supported the music.
Yeah, well, it's like in that stage in particular, it was a subversion of what you would expect a Bramble stage to sound like.
That's true.
It was this, and from what I've heard, that was originally the music theme, and it just didn't work in any of the ship holds. But
it was for like swimming stages.
Did I say music theme?
Yeah, music theme. Yeah,
I meant water theme.
It is indeed a music theme.
Yeah, it is the most melodic, harmonious music theme. And anyway, he repurposed it, but very wisely.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Haha, yeah, right.
Yeah, but I think that it was really cool that they were already playing with what the players' expectations were going to be in the sequel that came out a year later.
Yeah.
I bet the composer of Donkey Kong 64 Kirk hoped he could match that.
Ouch.
I'm gonna go lie down.
Yeah, you were really fishing for that one.
Aha.
I should just leave through this Norgate.
Yeah. We should ask our friend Ron over on his Beanland.
Ron
the farmer.
Oh, Ron.
Deep
Okay.
All the bean farmer.
Got it.
That's a deep pull. You got that one.
I did. Okay, well, I mean,
Screeching halt. That's what we do when we invite people on the show.
Right.
No, but do you feel like there was any sort of across the entire Donkey Kong Country series, or at least Rare's stewardship of it, any defining principle for their aesthetic approach, or did they sort of mix it up every entry?
I think, well, it's an interesting question, because part of the reason why I love the trilogy as a trilogy so much is that it's hard to even put your finger on, but each game is incredibly distinct from one another, but yet feel incredibly coherent with one another. In a way that other series tend to not be, because Donkey Kong Country 2 is extremely distinct from the first one, because the first one is very naturalistic, jungles, it's just basic nature, and like there's a vague military theme with, the Kremlings, but with the second one, it has this really heavy swashbuckling, pirate thing going on and really dark, it's totally different from the first one, but yet there's something about it that feels very connected to it, and it's hard to really put your finger on, and I really wouldn't even know what to say it is even now.
Our friend Josh from the Geek Critique, he's doing a series of videos for the Donkey Kong Country and overall Donkey Kong series right now on his YouTube
and I'm sure
channel.
the check's in the mail.
Yeah, thank you. But this is a discussion we've been having with him, kind of as he's been making these, and I brought up a point after his DKC3 video. I said, each game in the Donkey Kong Country trilogy kind of matches the personality of the lead Kong. So you've got Donkey, he's laid back, a natural world, no frills really. Meanwhile, Diddy starts in a swashbuckling pirate adventure that's suited for a 12-year-old boy. And Dixie's,
or Ke Huy Quan for that matter.
Well, there you go. And it's the Goonies. He stars in the Goonies.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And then Donkey Kong Country 3 is kind of more whimsical. It's got elements like banana birds. Kind of almost has a not a fairy tale aesthetic, but it's got more definitely fantasy trappings. And
it's more explorative as well.
Yeah, it's more of let's just head off into the great unknown, and we don't know what we're going to experience.
And even on the map screen, you have full control over the next place you're going.
Which, given that Dixie's character is the Kong who loves just pure adventure and exploration the most.
Right.
She was the one who was giddy that the snowmans were invading at the beginning of Tropical Freeze. If you look at that video, she's kind of smiling because she was like, "Oh boy, I'm going to go on an adventure." And so looking at that, I don't know. I don't think Rare planned it. I very much doubt they do. I think that's a retroactive examination of the trilogy, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I had never thought about that before, but that really does make a lot of sense. And it made me realize that maybe part of the connective tissue with it is that each game feels like it has a really grand scope to it, and it feels like each game has a big world with a big idea going on. Like the first one, the bananas get stolen, which, isn't, but anyway, it's the bananas get stolen.
It's actually, I know, fellow DK Vine staffer Matt Corna would argue that the whole first game was kind of a subversion of platforming tropes. So it kind of had a crappy plot on purpose.
Yeah.
His bananas are stolen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, I think in the same breath as that theory, K. Rool himself was sort of a piss take on, reptilian crowned bad guys.
And that's something I never considered until Matt brought it up to me. He kind of threw shade at me after my Hall of Fame induction for K. Rool in the DK Vine Hall of Fame, and where I said he kind of grew into a great character, but didn't start out that way. And Matt said, no, he was always kind of a parody. His name is King K. Rool, for Christ's sake. And I was like,
right.
Oh wow. Yeah,
and then
right.
he's a parody of the pirate captain bad guy in video games that was pretty frequent back then. And then all of his archetypes, I can totally see Rare taking that approach, but it never clicked until very recently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, after Donkey Kong Country, I moved on to Donkey Kong Country 2. But actually, I was not being 4 or 5 years old. I wasn't even aware of the existence of Donkey Kong Country 2 until I went to a video store even more ghetto than a grocery store with video games. It was in a town of probably about 500 people, and it was basically a shack. I remember it was very, very poorly lit. I'm not shitting you. Like, this really happened. It was basically in a shack. It was very poorly lit. It was dirty. It was run down. It was a miracle.
A guy in a hockey mask was murdering teenagers having sex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was going on in the background. I was too young for his taste, though.
Yeah, that was in the room behind the beaded curtain.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I was in this place, and part of the reason why I have such a vivid memory of this is that the atmosphere of that place, it just seems so appropriate for finding Donkey Kong Country 2 for the first time. Because it was dark, it was dank, it was perfect. And I just saw Donkey Kong Country 2 there in its case, and I couldn't believe it. It's like, this is a thing. This is a thing. It really is infinite now. They're going to keep making games forever. And,
that should have been a critical quote for Donkey Kong Country 2, the dankiest Donkey Kong yet.
Yeah. I just picture Donkey Kong smoking a blunt, but no, I found that, and I was blown away that they even made a second one, and so immediately I had to rent it. Interestingly enough, when I first played it, it had been played up until Crazy Crimland, and so I had got to play like some of those later stages before I played some of the earlier stages because
wow.
the rental copy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that back in those days when you could get someone else's save game.
Right. And so I was playing somebody.
What a strange world.
I know, right? I wish we still.
So you actually jumped into World 4.
Well, I mean, I think I played like the first couple levels, and I was like, well, let's see what else there is. And I moved on and kind of jumped around and skipped around. The only thing I remember distinctly skipping to is Target Terror, because it really stuck out in my mind. The idea that they took the minecart concept and put it on a roller coaster, which as a kid just is mind blowing, because you think of the original minecart, it pretty much is a roller coaster, a very dangerous one, and it's brilliant to actually make it into an actual roller coaster.
Yeah, and the way they did the visuals in that stage too, with the fireworks
it's fantastic.
popping behind you.
Yeah. It's
and the music where you can hear the screams of the other people at the park.
Right, yeah. It's fantastic. And that's another example of how well they were able to capture aesthetic.
The character animations too. You can't forget like Dixie holding up her hands as they go down the roller coaster, and it's just
those little touches. Those were kind of almost character moments in a way. It made them. Like, you had stages that were on rails in Super Mario World, but he would just stare straight ahead with dead eyes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why the Kongs just resonate so much with me that, they didn't really speak. They did in DKC3 a bit, but, they weren't just soulless avatars. They were imbued with all these little touches, so you knew their personalities, you knew what they were thinking and how they viewed the world. And
I think this is actually part of why the radical shift in aesthetic from 1 to 2 kind of works, is because you still have those same characters that still have those same personalities, and it's little touches, but it comes through and it has that connective tissue.
Yeah, and there were and getting back to the visuals, I mean, I know that we established that these are more kind of surrealist than the stages, while having a realistic bent. But some of the technological elements in of what they went through to render the world. I think that probably the most impressive thing in Donkey Kong Country was the 16 layers of parallax snow. But in this game, they absolutely blow it out of the water with the underwater ship's hold stages, and it's a very subtle effect. But if it becomes very apparent if you play the version on the Virtual Console now. But in the background, there's a fully 3D, what's essentially a polygonal series of beams. That scroll up and down along with you, and it's sort of an extension of what they did with the ocean floor in the first Donkey Kong Country game, but they really used the technology that they were pushing the limits of the Super Nintendo for reasons that had nothing to do with gameplay. Mm-hmm. It was all about establishing that world.
Yeah, it feels like, as great as the gameplay for the Donkey Kong Country games are, it really, I mean, I keep going back to this point, but it really feels like they wanted to create something beyond just a game, whereas every other developer at the time was just concerned about, gameplay mechanics. And it felt like Rare, they came up with this gameplay mechanic, and then they're like, well, what can we build around it? And then they spent the rest of the time building around it.
I don't think that's such a, radical notion. I think, given what Chris Sutherland just said on this very show about how they want to build a shared Platonic universe, I think that desire was kind of always in them to some degree. And, it's not just us reading too much into it. I think clearly they were thinking the same thing that we, have been saying for years.
Yeah, I think I would be, stunned if they weren't because of all the evidence that's there. And it appeals to me so much because I've never really been the programmer type person. I've never been like the super analytical person. I've always been someone who's been interested in stories and characters and stuff like that. And, atmospheres and worlds. And that's exactly what Donkey Kong Country is. As great as the gameplay is, what's so appealing about it is the context that is put in.
So you were that person that would like a game for its graphics, even if the gameplay was mediocre.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But no.
Why do... Well, here's my question. Why do you think people... a large portion of vocal people on the internet, at least, don't appreciate that? Why do, if the aesthetic of the series is such a draw for us, why is it somewhat of a turnoff for others?
Honestly, I think it's probably because Nintendo is so notoriously about gameplay, and the kind of people that are interested, that are around Donkey Kong Country and would be talking about it, are Nintendo fans. And Nintendo fans, hardcore Nintendo fans very well know that that's Nintendo's philosophy, and they've gravitated towards Nintendo because of that. And so the people that would be attracted to the idea of aesthetic and stuff like that aren't necessarily Nintendo fans in general, because that's not really what Nintendo as a whole is about. Like, I know for myself, I'm a huge Donkey Kong fan, and I like Mario, and I like Zelda, and I like Metroid, and so on. But I actually tend to gravitate more towards other games made by other companies, because for my own tastes, Nintendo, while making really, really good games that I respect in their own right, don't always 100% appeal to who I am as a person. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of tough, because really, what appeals to you from a Nintendo game really has to be what kind of gameplay you like, because Kirby could be Mario, and it would just be a weird Mario spin-off. It's like the general, they all have their own distinct gameplay styles, but that's really the only thing that is distinct between the tones of all those games.
Right, and even...
I think that's why we're such Rare loyalists, is because Rare is a version of Nintendo that does focus or puts a greater importance on things like story and aesthetic.
Yeah. Right.
And, that's one of the reasons that I really loved Metroid Prime, and I liked Super Metroid. I thought that the exploration in it was cool, but all of the people, it gets criticism as, one of the most boring Metroid games by, some people love it. Some people fucking hate the fact that it has all these things to scan that give you lore about the world. But that's what I had the most fun with in that game. Mm-hmm. They actually put forth the effort, and it's sort of why Skyrim scratches that itch for me. There's all this world building that's going on completely unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. It really does pull you in, and then let you appreciate the gameplay that much more.
Yeah, and Rare has, I was going to say always has been doing that, but I don't think Jetpack was doing that. Or RC Pro-Am.
That was their victory lap about being able to make a game on the Spectrum.
Right.
Like, we made these colors do a thing.
Right. But at least since the 90s, at least in the 90s, Rare was they were doing Nintendo style games, but they weren't doing them in the same way Nintendo approached them. They had the type of gameplay that Nintendo did, but they were exploring beyond that. And it's sort of frustrating a little bit now because they're really, if you want a Nintendo game, you have to buy a Nintendo game. And Nintendo doesn't tend to put a lot of, emphasis on aesthetic and world and stuff like that. And since there's not really a Rare anymore, unless you want to count retro, and that's, the only, it's kind of, I feel like it's almost like a market that doesn't exist anymore and really only existed for that pocket of time.
There's a little bit more of that in the Zelda series, and I think that's owing to the fact that Eiji Aonuma is a singular driving force on that series, and he clearly has some sort of interest in a larger narrative.
The thing about Zelda is that I feel like it gets so close to doing it, but doesn't quite, and it ends up being frustrating to me because of it. Because it's like it tries to build this fantasy world, but it just doesn't quite flesh it out or have enough coherency, and it just ends up leaving you with a bunch of questions and a bunch of gaps that aren't easy to fill and are clearly just because they neglected to fill them.
Well, that's what I kind of like about it. Like in Skyward Sword, you see this society of robots that, there was obviously some technological civilization that was there thousands of years before the first game in the series.
True.
And that brings up a lot of questions, but and that now I'm looking at this weird future tech that seems to be in the open world Zelda, and I'm thinking, hey, is there a connection there? And I get how frustrating it is, but I thrive on that kind of stuff.
See, for me, the frustrating thing about Zelda at this point is that it feels like each game, each major entry in the series, it's starting to get repetitive because you have this generational reset. There's a new Link. It's a new Link.
Exactly.
Some descendant. And I would really like to see them just say, you know what, we're going to stay in the same time period of Hyrule for a couple games. We're going to see
they did
sequels.
it with Majora and Ocarina.
Yeah, I know. And the first in Zelda and Zelda 2, Link's Adventure. But
and then the hero of time shows up in Twilight Princess.
Right. But I don't know. I would like to... I feel like Hyrule never gets fleshed out. It just gets reset, and I would like to see a little bit more consistency there. I feel like I can never really get comfortable with that world because it's always jumping ahead a couple hundred years.
Yeah. You know that by the next game, like the whole thing is completely transient.
Yeah, Zelda is so shifting sands. It's like whenever you get a grip on what's going on, like you have a whole nother thing that, contradicts it or is just totally different, and it feels like you can never really grasp it. It's like water through your palm.
Where with the Donkey Kong,
that's fair.
I mean, the Donkey Kong series I like because you've got this kind of consistent chain of islands, and you know what? I mean, strangely enough, and it's not planned this way, but like the geography has been syncing up since the Rare days into, Namco Donkey Konga 2 had offshore islands with a mountain and then another one with a city, which perfectly coincides with Donkey Kong Land, and it's just like it's amazing to me that the world, I understand the world of Donkey Kong. It's fleshed out in my mind, and it's not just it's a new game, it's new rules. We're gonna reinterpret the world our way in this game. I mean, even Returns held close to the geography established in the first game in 1994.
Well, aside from the whole, island changing, but
no.
But it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
right. I know. The fan wank lines up. Yeah. Yes.
Well, see, I think that's the key.
The forest is where the forest was. It's anyway. Sorry.
It's okay. But no, I feel like that's like the key difference between Zelda and Donkey Kong, because with Zelda, it's like you fill in the gaps, but it's not really consistent enough to really do it because there's like hard resets almost. Whereas with Donkey Kong, you can fill in the gaps and you can create a consistent world in your head. It's very difficult to do that with Zelda.
Yeah, and another thing that I think that really the reset that Zelda goes through every game was probably originally to serve gameplay purposes. You need a training mode at the start of the game, and what better way to do it than to treat the character as if he's brand new. So you
can do it like Nuts and Bolts, where the Link's just gotten fat over the years.
He's just a grizzled old man telling stories about hook shots and dodongos.
He hasn't done anything since he was a kid.
No, he's been showing like college girls at the local university his Dodongo.
Just begging for rupees on a street corner.
Yeah.
Would you like to play my ocarina, ladies?
What does that even mean?
Oh, blowing him.
Oh, like their mouths on his penis.
Yeah.
Oh, sex acts.
Innuendo.
Anyways.
Wait, who was whistling? What was that?
Yeah. What
I was
whistle
just
dick
playing
was
my
that?
ocarina.
Oh, okay. And again at a screeching halt.
Should we move on to Donkey Kong Country 3 then?
Yeah, so part 3 is obviously developed by, more or less a different team. Do you feel like there was anything that when the franchise made that leap between from team to team, did anything fall into the gaps between?
Not really, because there was such a huge gap in terms of the feel of the game between 1 and 2 that any change in the feel between 2 and 3 is really not anymore. If anything, I feel like 3 is closer to the first game than 2 is to the first game. Because it doesn't have... 3 kind of becomes a little bit more naturalistic again, but in its own way. I feel like 3 is... Whereas 1 is kind of mellow and chill and natural, and 2 is more high energy, swashbuckling. 3 is more... it's naturalistic, but it's eerie. It's a little bit more in the uncanny valley than 1 or 2 is. And I think it serves it very well because, from the very beginning of the game, when you hear the really haunting overworld music, I feel like that carries through the whole game. The enemies are all slightly different. They feel slightly more weird compared to the what has came before. Much more weird concepts crop up. It just feels like a little more weird, a little more eerie, but in a way that I find very attractive and enjoy.
And there are a lot of kind of gimmicky stages as well. And I'm not saying gimmicky is as a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's but they're they established an archetype of redwood trees, and there's a stage where there's a bandsaw that's destroying the tree, and they. But that was an entire stage. A very similar version was in the canyon stages when there's the rope that's on fire and you have to keep climbing vertically. There was the pipe stages where they mess with your control scheme. There's all kinds of different ways where they mixed up platforming in a way that the archetype was able to serve and make it kind of make sense.
Yeah.
But that did play into the archetype because, as Andy said, the game had this eerie sense of the unknown. So even when you knew what archetype the level was going to be based off the map, you didn't know what that level was going to throw at you because it was going to be a complete reinvention of the concept.
The concept, as it were.
The concept, yes.
As it were.
Yes.
Yeah. But, I like that, because, Country 1, you're on your home island, and that had some eerie moments, too. I mean, let's not forget some of the caves or the mines.
Yeah,
the
like
mines
Misty
in particular.
Mine. Yeah.
Yeah. But if Country 1, you're on your home turf. Country 2, you're on enemy turf. Country 3, you're kind of on neutral ground. I mean, it's probably more friendly than not, but you don't really know what's...
3. I kind of see it as 1 home turf, 2 enemy turf, and 3 is undiscovered country.
Yeah.
Neutral. Yeah, exactly. 3 is Star Trek 6.
Yeah, I was setting you up for that. I'm glad you picked it up.
But I mean that really gels for me when you fly up with the gyrocopter underneath the clouds and suddenly you're talking to a giant banana bird, and it just there's a certain level of terror there. I mean, it's kind of scary because you don't know what's up behind those clouds, but you're gonna fly underneath there, and I like that. It kind of made me feel like a kid scared to see what the next level will bring.
Yeah, it was just like when Kirk flew up in the clouds and was helped by that giant banana bird Sulu in the Excelsior.
Yeah.
So video games.
Moment of silence for Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, it's about. Something just occurred to me in my head. The Banana Bird thing was almost taking it too far because there were elements of 3 that were kind of goofy almost, but I think they pulled it off, and at least in my mind, because I know some people consider 3 to be kind of more cartoony, off the wall, but for me it just comes off as eerie. Now, if they would have thrown the Queen Banana Bird in at the very beginning, I think my perception of it would change. But as it were, the fact that was at the very end of the game, it was almost sort of a Ghostbusters situation where they led up to it enough that you believed it by the time you got there.
I was going to mention Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and you had those flying around Wrinkly's save cave throughout the entire game.
Right.
So there's something is a little strange.
Mm-hmm. But they managed to
in your neighborhood.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think I always question how much they really intended to have that eerie vibe in 3. Because it could be very well that they were just like, well, let's do something different, and they did, and it just came off that way. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the music itself is very atmospheric, very eerie, and in some ways, I'm kind of, as much as I love Wise and as much as perfect he was for 2, I think Fisher worked out better for 3 because she, as you said, she provided the more atmospheric tracks for the first game, and on 3 she was allowed to really explore that more. And like I said, from the very beginning, you get that overworld theme that's just very haunting and really sets the tone for the rest of the game. And without that, the game has a different vibe. Like, I think that Donkey Kong Country 3 for the Game Boy Advance feels like a different game simply because the music is different. It has more of that goofy vibe, whereas it has more of an eerie vibe on the SNES, and it's mainly to do with the music, I think. And
that's a strange one because, obviously the 3 of us grew up with the Super Nintendo version of that, and so that's what's imprinted on my brain, and it's what works and clicks and makes sense to me. But there's a whole generation of people who found Donkey Kong Country 3 by way of that game, and I just can't wrap my head around it. To me, it's a completely different game, and as great as David Wise's music was, it feels wrong to me.
Well, it's actually a mustache on a Mona Lisa.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see where you're coming from, but I see it differently because I dislike the Game Boy Advance games of 1 and 2 because they get close, but they don't quite get it. Whereas I really like 3 because it feels like a separate thing. Like, I can disassociate it from my mind more easily, and I can accept it as a separate experience with different, a different aesthetic and a different feel to it. And I appreciate that, but that's just me.
Okay, yeah, I could definitely see that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I of course, like Country 1 and 2 on the Game Boy Advance completely destroyed the aesthetic by having such light backgrounds.
Well, yeah, I think it's not just that either. I think that's relevant to bring up. I feel like the Game Boy Advance games, except maybe Sans 3, completely destroyed what was going for it in the SNES versions. And it isn't just because they lightened the screen, it's because every little thing they changed or added, I think, detracted from it. Like, the way they changed the maps, suddenly they have less character, they seem to fit the stages less. All the little extra trinkets that they threw in really seemed to more just chop the game up and make it seem clunkier.
Well, and they made them goofier, too.
Yeah, they did.
There was, like, the end of Donkey Kong Country 2 suddenly had dialogue, that perfect scene of Crocodile Isle blowing up and K. Rool sailing away. Suddenly, the Kongs were shouting at K. Rool, and he was shouting back, like, I'll be back. Yeah. And I'm like, what is this? What?
Yeah, that's not right.
No.
And part of that might have been because, what we've heard is that the original assets no longer existed, so a lot of it was, repurposing sprites, but when they couldn't do that, probably in the case of the map screens, they were forced to rebuild them from scratch.
Right.
And so they took an opportunity to try and do something different, but
yeah, it's just like it's like an old band doing like a cover versions of their own songs.
That is
not right.
That's an incredibly good comparison. I never thought of it that way, but that's like exactly what it is. It's like they can't quite capture that magic again.
Yeah.
But
well, okay, so the original trilogy, I think, the aesthetic held up. I do want to pick your brain a bit because Donkey Kong 64 is kind of on all of our brains at the moment. Just re-released on the eShop, coming out here in the U.S. very
just
shortly.
a couple days, actually.
Yeah. So, Donkey Kong 64, one of the things we kind of have been raking it over the coals for over the years is the complete shift in tone and aesthetic from that game, from the SNES games. And what are your feelings on DK64's tone?
I won't disagree that it is a complete tonal shift, but maybe it's just nostalgia, but I like the aesthetic of Donkey Kong 64, and I don't see it as simply Banjo-Kazooie reskinned. I feel like in some ways it is. It has the same sort of cartoony vibe that Banjo-Kazooie does, but it's still tinged with the atmospheric, feel of the Donkey Kong countries. And, it comes through, even... I'm trying to think of specific examples. I mean, whole worlds like Crystal Caves, portions of Gloomy Galleon, they still kind of have that same vibe.
I'll agree with you there. I think the worlds that captured it the best, that captured the spirit of DKC, or Jungle Japes, Gloomy Galleon, parts of Crystal Caves, maybe. But then you've got other worlds that just completely kind of botch it. And maybe not as much as I'm remembering, because looking back, Angry Aztec didn't really fit the world of Donkey Kong, but it did have kind of this solemn tone in spots.
I think go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, sort of similar with Frantic Factory, where we've had factories before, but they were always a little bit more menacing and less horror movie childhood creepy. It was a toy factory, and in the music itself there was a wind up toy sound, and that was kind of clever on Grant's part. But
DK64 felt like it was being developed by 3 separate teams, and then somebody came along at the end and tried to stitch them all together.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that. But I think you kind of hit what I'm getting at when you said it still has a solemn thing to it. And I think that's one of the unifying factors of the original trilogy, is that it had a very solemn vibe to it while still being cartoony enough to not be overly so. But 64 is, I really think, decidedly more solemn than Banjo-Kazooie is. It's a little bit more subdued, it's a little bit more atmospheric, and while it's not Donkey Kong Country, it still has enough of that for me to still enjoy it for those reasons. I can still enjoy its aesthetic because it's still close enough to that,
Honestly, I think a lot of that is the mood lighting. Donkey Kong 64 has that great lighting effects, and they maybe went overboard with it in some spots, but that kind of adds to this. There's a certain sense of gloom in a lot of places in the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, you look at a lot of the old renders back when they were doing furry shenanigans, and even before, they almost, I'd say, a good 75% of them have this red backlight off to the side that really kind of illuminates them and makes them. It makes the renders look more interesting than the kind of stuff you would be getting out of Nintendo when they first started doing renders, and even to this day, there was always a lighting element that Rare would use to set them apart, and I think that's really what the lighting, the dynamic lighting effects in DK64 recreated.
Yeah, absolutely.
It got them back to looking a lot like those old renders, and you think of running through a cave, in a video game of all things, you don't think about the colors purple and green. But but there were those lighting sources flashing around as you leave the treehouse area and get onto DK Isles proper, and it's like, oh, this is really interesting. It's not photorealistic, but it certainly sets it apart from anything you've seen before.
And maybe that was the problem, is that there's no way DK64 could be as photorealistic as the country games, or semi-photorealistic. And the shift from advanced computer models to polygonal 3D, models with less detail, it went into a more cartoony direction. Like when you would fall, you would splat, and then you would pick yourself up like a Tex Avery cartoon. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that makes the aesthetic off compared to the original games. But
right.
Yeah, I'm interested in replaying it here in a couple of days because I'm wondering how much of the firm opinion I've had of it for the last decade is actually faulty, and how much of the game I'm not remembering correctly.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways 64 feels like they took Banjo-Kazooie and they said, what can we do to make this a little bit more like Donkey Kong? And they made it a little bit more like Donkey Kong, but probably not enough. And well, they really shouldn't have
that's maybe the problem is they took Banjo-Kazooie and they said, now let's make this like Donkey Kong, rather than taking Donkey Kong Country and saying, let's make this a 3D platformer.
Yeah, I think that's really exactly the problem with it.
Yeah, and it's I'm really chomping at the bit to see how my opinion holds up, because I've been on both sides of the DK64 coin throughout the last 15 years, but I really haven't played it since my first 101%.
Now, when you say you've been on both sides of the coin, do you mean the yellow coins, the red coins, the blue coins,
the rare coin,
the
actually?
Coins? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let me get my player's guide because I don't really know where to find this coin.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there are entire fan communities that have been on both sides of the rare coin in the last 15 years.
Yeah. That's true. Well, you've played both retro games, right?
Yes. And highly enjoyed.
Think that? Okay, how do you think their aesthetics holds up to Rare? Because, we can talk about Donkey Kong 64 till we're blue in the face, but that was still essentially the same company, same developers developing, carrying the lineage forth. Retro was a completely different studio. You had, some continuity there when David Wise came on board and with Tropical Freeze, but they were essentially recreating that world from the ground up. So, do you think they were successful, or do you think they misfired?
I think they were close to successful with Returns and hit it out of the park with Tropical Freeze. I really liked Returns. I still like Returns. It's a really well done game. The way it plays is excellent. No, it's not exactly the same as the original games, but as on its own, it's very well done, and it throws back enough gameplay-wise to the original games to still feel like a Donkey Kong Country game. Aesthetic-wise, obviously I'm disappointed that there are no Kremlings, that they seem to try to, only reference the first game, and even then not head-on. But it still has a really great atmosphere to it. It's more cartoony, but not to the level of like Donkey Kong 64 more cartoony. It's really kind of in between, I would say, aesthetically, 64 and the original games. And I think it's really not a bad place to be. Because you get moments like in Ruins where you see this whole aqueduct system, and you go inside and, it feels like an Indiana Jones adventure, which is like a lot of what's so cool about the Donkey Kong Country games. And Retro really got that and understood it and implemented it. They faltered some. Like, I really dislike the music in Returns. It's mostly remixes.
Yeah, all due respect, but it was kind of came across as just a pale imitation. Not like Smash Brothers bad, where the Smash Brothers remixes, but it was still like, okay, well, this music in particular is invoking nostalgia for another game rather than saying anything about this game.
There were a few moments that I think kind of transcended that, like the stage with the tidal waves coming at you.
Yeah,
and
that was very Evelyn Fisher.
Yeah, it definitely. I think that there were the moments were the exception rather than the rule outside the remixed songs. But
I think you mean the Tong.
Right.
There's no rule in this game.
Yeah. That's yes. I was like, which word was he replacing? I thought you were replacing the word song with tong, and I'm like, I guess that's a rhyme. No, but they did lean heavily on songs like the Rocket Barrel. Just a slight remix every time you see it, and they didn't really do that as much. Back in Rare's time, it was archetype based, so certainly they reused music, but you would think they wouldn't lean on that in an era where that wasn't a technical concern.
Yeah, and Nintendo tries to do this whole, nostalgia thing. Like, they do that a lot. It seems like they're getting away from it some now, but especially during the period that Returns came out, they were very big about invoking nostalgia, which, I don't know, I guess kind of makes sense from a business standpoint, but I don't like the idea of being stuck in the mud and not just moving forward. And not that I'm wanting a jungle beat, but, it's...
But although Returns was a lot better with it than like the new Super Mario Brothers series. Returns
absolutely.
really did carve out its own identity, and maybe it had to because it wasn't Rare. But
then what Retro did so great that the team behind the new Super Mario Brothers series never did was that with Tropical Freeze, Retro said, "Okay, the series returned. This is just another entry."
Exactly.
It's not even Donkey Kong Country 4 or 5. This is just Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Right.
There's nothing in there that indicates it's reborn or rebooted or anything. It's just a game.
Yeah. And I like it better than the idea of... I was really partial to the name, Donkey Kong Country Forever, but especially the way... especially the way Chad puts it, it's like, I like the idea of, no, this is... We're moving forward now. We're not trying to be nostalgic. Like, this is just... We're taking this and we're going with it. And also, by the way, with the music in Returns, it's not just that they're remixes, it's that they're mediocre remixes. There are better remixes on OC Remix.
Yeah, well, certainly
worse ones too.
Well, there are.
Yeah, that's true.
At least there was no like weird like J-pop interpretations or weird raps in the middle of Returns music.
Oh, there are some weird raps in the DK series.
Yeah, but endearing.
That's true. I think that the remixes, it's not that they were... To me, the mediocrity is from the fact that they didn't take any risks.
Yeah.
It's basically just better instrumented versions of the same songs.
Mm-hmm. If that.
And on OC Remix, you have people that take a little creative license, and perhaps they did that out of respect for David Wise. But when we discussed on the show last year, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, one of the things we noticed was that it seemed like since David Wise had written a lot of those original songs, he must have felt more comfortable deviating from them.
Yeah.
So he would take that basic sort of melodic principle and expand on it and tweak it and evoke it, but do something new.
He would. Yeah, it's the word I was just going to use. He evoked it. He didn't just rehash it.
Mm-hmm.
But, now, Returns games were a lot more bombastic than Rare's. There's tranquil moments, but overall, there's, almost every level has stuff crumbling or exploding or, you getting blasted into the background and then things exploding. And, the serenity that was there in a lot of Rare games, the solemn feeling, as you said, was kind of replaced with a lot more action set pieces.
Yeah, and personally, I love that. I don't prefer it, but I like it. I guess I could say equally as much as the more solemn vibe because it's so well done and it still has such a realism to it. Like something I love about the retro countries is that everything is supported physically by something. It isn't just they do a better job of it than Rare did, honestly. Like everything has...
Even though it was Rare who pioneered it, and it was Retro who noticed that and said, well, this is what we've got to do to have a Donkey Kong Country. They then took that to the next level.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that Retro is very good at, is noticing little things that I guess you could say Retro is very good at noticing the forest for the trees when it comes to the country games. They see these little things and they say, that's cool, let's expand on that. And again, that's like an example of how they're different from like the new Super Mario games. They really understood what made those games great and expanded on them. Of course, they're lacking crimlings and there's like little things you can nitpick. But overall, they do a very good job of it. But
what do you think about Jungle Beat's aesthetic?
I've never played Jungle Beat. I I thought it looked outrageous at the time, and I kind of have the same point of view at this point, that it's more of an anomaly, and I'd be more willing to give it a chance now. So I don't know.
That was my feeling, and I gave it a chance, and I actually enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah.
Although that's from the perspective of having the retro revival and not thinking, oh, this is going to be the direction of the series moving forward, which is where a lot of the hostility came from at the time.
Yeah, this is what your franchise has become. Deal with it.
Yeah.
And it is a lot more. It's a very Japanese take on what Rare did, and so it's a lot less grounded in reality. Some stages are. There's a lot of cool stages that do feel like they belong in the world of Donkey Kong, and then there's complete batshit insanity. So it is what it is. But like it's an anomaly. It happens. We can acknowledge it in the canon, but I'm not going to let it hold me down anymore, and I'm not going to get angry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Embrace Jungle Beat for what it is, just the weird black sheep of the family.
Yeah, just don't do it again. But I think I really enjoyed Returns. I think it's a really solid game, and I still to this day enjoy it. But there was still a little bit missing. It relied too much on nostalgia while not actually, having nostalgia for the right things sometimes. It felt a little bit bare bones in some ways, just the idea of naming the worlds just what they are. It seemed a little soulless. But then with Tropical Freeze, I feel like they totally turned that around, and I think it's on par with the original games. As much as I like Returns, I still kind of see it as a little bit... It just doesn't quite have that all-star quality to it that the original games did. It doesn't have that timeless quality to it. Whereas Tropical Freeze, it's its own game, and it feels like it's a timeless game that holds up on its own and holds up within the series. It references the old games in the right ways enough, and evokes the right moods. That's just like, I could go on and on about how much I love Tropical Freeze, and how, as much as I love Returns, it's better than Returns in every conceivable way.
Well, you mentioned the lack of Kremlings earlier. How do you feel about the Tikis and the Snowmads? Do they seem to work within that world from an aesthetic point of view?
Tikis barely, Snowmads yes. I don't know. I don't hate the Tikis, but I can't. There's not really anything to write home about. I wish they would have just done the fucking Kremlings, but the Snowmads though, they have what the Tikis lack. They have a character to them. They have a real solidarity to them. It feels like there's something there. Like the Tikis, like they're their own. There's the Tiki Tak tribe, but it's hard for me to imagine what the day-to-day life of a Tiki is. You know what I mean?
It's hope that someone mashes up bananas in you.
Yeah.
and walking back and forth until somebody kills you.
Right. I mean,
well, now that could be said for Kremlings
or
too.
life.
No,
that's pretty much life in general, I would say. But.
The Tikis had more in common with the Goombas, I would say. They felt like reskinned Mario enemies, where the Kremlings had personality, and maybe that's just the benefit of walking on two legs. You can kind of identify with the Kremlings more.
Well, I think it's more than that.
Anthropomorphized.
I think it's more than that. It's like, the thing about the Tikis is that they don't even really feel they don't feel like they have any real personality, like in a literal sense. You can't imagine what their day-to-day lives are. Like I said, they're just NPC characters.
He's just bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. They're just bad guys. Like, and you kill them.
It's hard to want to beat the Tikis. They're just there.
Yeah,
they're obstacles.
Mm-hmm. Whereas with the Snowmads, like from the very first intro cutscene, they come in on the ship, and like they have this whole lore to them. They have this whole culture to them, and they try to bring their culture onto you, and you're like, no, I'm a proud native, and I'm gonna fight you. I don't believe in manifest destiny, and. Yeah, and it just works on so many more levels than the Tikis ever did. Granted, I still would have liked to see Kremlings, and I'm gonna be a lot more disappointed if I don't see them in the next game. But
I would be shocked if whatever iteration the next Donkey Kong game takes, that the Kremlins weren't involved.
Their profile is definitely rising through all of these virtual console releases that Nintendo is doing, and it seems like K. Rool has a pretty good shot as everyone crocs the vote. So
hashtag croc the vote.
Yeah.
But it's funny though. I actually do like the idea of if any series can have like multiple enemy tribes or whatever, I think Donkey Kong should be the one to have it. I like the idea of them having more enemies than just the Kremlings because...
so do I. I just don't want...
Well, we already had WizPig. They already have additional
and WizPig is stuck in legal limbo, so...
Yeah.
Possibly,
so it's not... it's not like adding... bad guys to the rogues gallery is violating sacred ground or anything. But it, so it is nice that they are broadening that. But I agree that
it's been too long.
Yeah, well, and the Snowmads are the first time in a long, long time where it feels like they belong there.
Yeah. And
then there's a trap. There's a trap you can fall into too, where you either reuse the same enemies again and again, or you have a new enemy each game.
Yeah,
but I think we want a middle ground where the Kremlins are the most reoccurring enemy. But we're if you want to give them a break for a game or two, that's fine. Just keep them around.
Yeah, and I would like the idea of. I mean, this is kind of a pipe dream, but the idea of there being main Donkey Kong games, Donkey Kong Country games that feature the Kremlings, and having more exploratory games that are more experimental, that have maybe different enemies, you explore different ideas, sort of like how the Payon games were, but that explore different aesthetics as well. I feel like that would be really ideal for Donkey Kong. What?
When you say exploratory games, I think one of my dream games for the Donkey Kong series would just be an open sandbox game where you explore Donkey Kong Island.
That would be incredible.
Like I think talking about my love of hiking and nature and your appreciation of it, I think actually being able to explore that world and not be confined to levels or worlds, that would be thrilling to me. Like,
or it could be kind of a best of both worlds thing, like a nature-based Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah,
yeah.
Or Donkey Kong
there
Skyrim.
Is a game there. Yeah, exactly. There's certainly a game, and there are things to do.
But you can also dick around if you want.
Exactly.
I don't think that would ever happen, but I think it would actually be a fantastic game if they ever did make it. But knowing Nintendo, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, because it would have to be, to really do it justice. At least from our point of view, it would need to be so steeped in continuity and all the world building that was done that I can't imagine Nintendo gives a shit about anymore.
No,
they could hire us to write it.
Yeah,
that'll happen.
I've thought about before how frustrating it is that like. I wish you two could do that because you two like just need to be like in charge of Donkey Kong. Like, I mean, you don't have to be the final say, but it's like, God damn it, you've earned it, We
put in our time,
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we would immediately drive the series into the ground.
See, the danger in that thinking, Andy, is that that's the same mentality that like people who have been in the Senate for years think, well, it's my time to be president. I've earned it. And
yeah.
No.
Yeah, all you've done is block legislation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It might be for the best that we're just kind of off on the fandom sidelines and
well, to a degree, we're our influence is already starting to be felt. Unfortunately,
What way?
Well, it's not out yet, but we're having a bit of say on Lobo Destroyo, which whatever. I don't know what I'm getting at. Well, I'm trying to be self-deprecating, and it fell apart.
Yeah, you're now shit talking Lobo Destroyo because we're writing for it.
Yeah, but then that doesn't make any. Just cut all that out. Whatever.
The first edited Kongversation episode, just to cut that out.
Oh no, it's happened.
Oh, damn! You're destroying my dreams now. I have this image of you never ever making any mistakes.
No.
The aesthetic of the Kongversation has been ruined.
Oh no. But yeah, I love Tropical Freeze. Like I said, I think it's everything they tried to do in Returns fully realized. It's, as much as I love Returns, it's actually almost hard to go back to it because it feels like a watered down Tropical Freeze. And they brought enough back to where it doesn't feel like, because one thing about Returns is that not quite enough returned. It was enough to like pacify you, but it just wasn't quite there. Whereas with Tropical Freeze, like you have Dixie, Cranky, various other things return, like the Brambles. Not really the same Brambles, but at least they were trying. It feels more like a Donkey Kong Country game. There are more solemn moments, and the music, of course, like I can't believe I haven't brought that up yet. Like the music is fantastic in that game.
Yeah, and every stage has multiple original songs.
Yeah, like they're huge, long songs and like huge, long stages.
Oh yeah, that was the thing when we first heard that the worlds are only 6 stages long and there's only 6 worlds, and we're thinking, oh shit, are there less than 40 levels in this thing? But then like no, there are the 2 bonus stages, and then the levels themselves take 5 minutes to get through if you're speed running. They're massive. It is such a huge game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is, and it's really a labor of love. Everything about it has a personality. It has so much more soul than Returns did, and the original games had so much soul to them, and I think it finally really returned in Tropical Freeze. You really see it there.
Well, overall, do you have a favorite game from specifically an aesthetic point of view out of the whole series?
From strictly an aesthetic point of view?
Yeah. Not necessarily what hits the most nostalgic beats or what your favorite one, but just which one do you appreciate on that level the most?
I don't know, because it kind of goes back to what I said about each game feels so distinct that aesthetically, 2 is my favorite game, but aesthetically they're kind of hard to compare because they're so distinct from one another to the point where I appreciate on an aesthetic level each one for different reasons. Although I will say I Returns is definitely the least favorite. So
yeah, okay.
But I would
just because it retreads so much ground doesn't actually do its own thing.
It isn't really quite its own thing. It tries to borrow too much from the past. Whereas I would put Tropical Freeze aesthetically at the same level, and really gameplay for that matter, on the same level as the original trilogy. So
yeah, I think I would definitely agree there.
Yeah, I think it's as I said, it's probably my second favorite after Country 2 right now. So it definitely did the job.
Yeah,
I really wish I could have been a fly on the wall while Playtonic was playing Tropical Freeze, like what they actually thought. There were a lot of people who, when we had Chris Sutherland on the show, that wanted to know how he felt and if he had played the retro games, and we didn't have time to ask, but I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, that would be absolutely fascinating, because they're going to pick up on certain things that the average player may not. Like, they'll think, oh, they incorporated like this idea that we had from because of this and that and the other thing. And
like oh look, they slightly tweaked the jumping physics in this way, and look what that let them do.
Yeah, that's probably a lot of what went on actually, because the physics are a little bit different in the Returns games, and it of course alters the way that it would be designed, and it would be really fascinating to hear designers from the original game saying, well, if this had the old mechanic, I would have put this here because of this and that, and it would be absolutely fascinating.
Right, and I'm sure that they probably, with the technology on the systems now, you actually have a camera that can zoom in and out, and there are, it can go to the side, and there are all these things that they might have wanted to do on the Super Nintendo that only now can actually be executed. So perhaps in a way, some of this is a realization of things that they might have dreamed of doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like having one animal buddy.
Right.
Hey, now Squawks is in there.
Oh, that's right.
He helps you find puzzle pieces.
Yeah, he's truly just a buddy. Like, he's just But yeah, I think retro they carry the torch fantastically, and if Returns 3D is any indication, I hope that Monster is the next one to carry the torch, because I think they will, do so quite well.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we might be hearing about maybe a Donkey Kong Land Returns or something in that line at E3.
Yeah.
It just there has to be a reason Nintendo is flooding the market with these these rare era Donkey Kong games.
Oh yeah, I think we're going to see a new Donkey Kong game of some sort during E3. I was talking about this with Hyle off the air, that it's Donkey Kong Country especially is such a popular franchise, and I think Nintendo realizes that now.
Well, it's not Metroid.
Yeah, it's not. It's not a game that doesn't sell well. But yeah, I for the record, I actually do love Metroid, and I would like to see another game.
I'm just knocking the people who are shitheads about Tropical Freeze. I'm not knocking Metroid.
Oh, I know. But to clarify, yes, I do think Metroid is fantastic, but the fact is, it doesn't sell games like Donkey Kong does. And it's taken them a long time to realize it, but I think Nintendo finally realizes what a cash cow this is. And I think we're right at the dawn of another, Donkey Kong renaissance. And fantastically, it's happening at the same time that there's an entire DKU renaissance. And
the Renaissance, as we've been calling
I
it.
fucking hate that. Yeah, but you've got Conker, potentially Banjo, you've got whatever's going on with Ukulele, and it's all kind of coalescing. These branches of the Donkey Kong universe we thought would be dormant forever. Or actually there's some life being breathed into them all at once.
You might even have some crossover with, Banjo into Ukulele, maybe the Kongs into Ukulele, just hypothetically. It's an exciting time. And,
would you say that there's never been a better time to join?
Yes, now would be that time. Absolutely. I do wish more Nintendo fans could appreciate what Donkey Kong Country brings to the table. And, I feel like they get so mechanical with how they appreciate games that, just the sheer visceral joy of running around Donkey Kong Island, I feel like it's lost on them. And maybe they just need to get outside more and experience nature. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're just a bunch of fucking nerds in their little dungeons of rooms. Their pale skin.
Yeah. Stupid nerds.
Nerds. Yeah. Not like we're cool jocks here on the Kongversation.
Yeah, and as cool jocks, that's how we like to refer to ourselves.
That's right. We're at our own lunch table, wearing letters on our jackets.
Oh.
This has been a File 2 production.